Going bust abroad, a new legal service is helping Irish people relocate to the UK to take advantage of their more relaxed bankruptcy laws. And with some very high-profile names doing just this, could filing for bankruptcy abroad be for everyone? We're joined now by the owner of this new service, Anthony Joyce, and Nolene Blackwell of Flack, and you're both very welcome to the show this morning. Anthony, we'll start with you. Obviously, you think demand for UK bankruptcy will continue to be high. Absolutely. Going forward.
There's a lot of talk in the media at the moment in relation to people going bankrupt abroad, and we see it on the ground, people needing some form of solution to their debt, and if that means emigrating to the UK and availing of their bankruptcy legislation, well then that's a service and I was hoping to offer some of my clients.
Well, just tell us a bit about how long it takes to go bankrupt in Ireland and compare it to the UK. Well,
in the UK, their bankruptcy, you can be discharged from bankruptcy within 1 year, and compared that to Ireland, where at the moment the new legislation, the Insolvency Act, which is soon to be implemented, is bringing that down to 3 years. But there is a sting in the tail where the banks can apply for somebody to continue making further payments for a further 5 years.
So it could potentially be 8 years here, whereas in the UK it's 12 months, but you have to reside in the UK for 6 months previous. Right?
This is what's called building up your centre of main interest, or your COMI, and a lot of people think that they may just nip over there, go bankrupt and then come back to Ireland. It's not necessarily the case. It has to be done properly. It means effectively emigrating over to the UK to avail of their service or to their bankruptcy legislation.
Okay, so it is a tough decision to have to make.
It's upping yourself over to the UK. There was a recent case last year where a German national moved to the UK. His insolvency in the UK, or his bankruptcy, was annulled. He went over saying he was a photographer, but he didn't even have a camera, and then he also was saying that he wasn't going back to Germany, but yet he was still making applications to be a notary back in Germany. So this is the detail. It's very subjective, and it's very difficult to know exactly whether a judge will say, yeah, that's fine, you can go through, or whether so it changes depending on the judge you meet in the UK. And that's why I've linked up with a UK specialist to make it easy for people to get the proper advice.
But how broke does somebody need to be to go over to the UK? I mean, we're not talking about somebody, you know, maybe who owes 500,000, are we, or who's in mortgage arrears?
We've had clients go over to the UK and they've only had 170,000 worth of debt. But for them, that's the same as 170 million, because it's non-attainable. Their circumstances are such that they'll never be able to pay that back.
But is this for a business person, or is it for your average householder?
It's for the person who's willing to up sticks and leave. Okay. So it can be for a family if they're willing to move to the UK. And there's a lot of Irish people over there. There's a lot of links. And again, we will be assisting people in the relocation. But again, it's not for everybody. It's because our insolvency laws, which are coming in, are still going to be very difficult for certain people. And this is it's a quicker way of dealing with their debt, and it's a definite way of dealing with it, where they take control of it.
Nolene, are you getting many inquiries in Flack about people wanting to go abroad and avail of this?
It's interesting. There were more inquiries about becoming bankrupt overseas than we're getting at the moment. They seem to have packaged themselves into a little group. And I think that's because it is quite important to remember that the people who are phoning about debt are very often not insolvent at all. To pick up on that point that you were making earlier, Sybil, like, you actually have to be insolvent. You have to be in a position where you cannot meet your debts. An awful lot of people who are contacting us at the moment are talking about restructuring their debts, and they want to do things like hang on to their home. And for those people, it's simply not an option to go bankrupt anywhere if they can. They're going to try and restructure in Ireland. And there was also, I think, there was a real sense at the end of last year that even though it may not be as easy, that insolvency would be available in Ireland on somewhat more reasonable terms at the start of 2013. The unfortunate thing now is that we're a third of the way through the year. We still don't have the systems in place. It looks like it will be the summer earliest before we have insolvency legislation. And
but we'll know a bit more over the next few days. Those
that's
guidelines
exactly
are
right.
Coming out.
So all of that is part of the necessary building blocks to start the insolvency the legislation, but we're now hearing it could be June. I'm now wondering, is it going to be July? Because June seems unrealistic. So for people, they had hoped and anticipated that they would be able to do something about it. But I think it's important too to remember who it doesn't suit. So it doesn't suit the person who has a job here in Ireland that they want to hold on to, because that means their centre of interest is here. It doesn't suit if they want to hold on to their house. It also is a little bit expensive. It is quite expensive. You have to take yourself over to another country. You have to rent a place. You have to identify with the new country in some way. So it's disruptive. It's expensive, it's not suitable for people who want to hold on to a job here. So there's a lot of people that it won't work for. And that's not to take from Anthony's solution for some people, but it's just for a lot of people, A, they're not insolvent, and B, even if they were, running over to the UK and trying to establish their centre of interest over there, which is crucial, that isn't just a viable option.
But it isn't always a case of running over to the UK. You could also just head north.
Well, yeah, which I suppose is part of the UK, but you're right, and but it is the same thing. It is, again, you still have to establish that centre of interest over there. How do you do that if you have your job down here, if your family, your bank account is here, if all of that is here? And crucially, for so many people with personal debt, their mortgage debt is part of it, and the big choice they would have to make to avail of Anthony's solution in Northern Ireland or in anywhere in Britain would be getting rid of their home.
Yeah.
And then, you know, so that's a huge adjustment.
And Anthony, that is a requirement.
To
give up the family home,
and that's it. Bankruptcy means you lose your family home, and unless you know when it goes on the market and somebody that you know is going to buy it for you, then there's no way that you're going to lose it. That's the reality of it. So, and there's not many people who would have somebody who's willing to do that for them. So, but with regard to going up to the north of Ireland, the master up in the Northern Ireland is, again, this is very subjective. So she is looking at everybody's details, in especially Southern Irish people going up there in real detail. And unless you do it absolutely properly in Northern Ireland, in other words, you can cut all your ties down the south, or have a job up there, or working, and can prove that you are there, then you will not be.
So you can't decide, say, to move to Newry, but commute every day to the south to do a day's work.
So how do you establish your centre of interest?
Yeah.
I do think, though, and a lot of people who are looking in won't remember back this far, but before we had divorce in Ireland in the mid-90s, there was an awful lot of people also going to Northern Ireland, going over to Britain, going to the Dominican Republic, and getting divorces of sorts. If they worked, that was fine, but they had to be valid. You had to fulfil the residency requirements. A lot of people spent a lot of time and energy getting bits of paper that were worth nothing. So we're still at the stage where we're using the back door to Britain and to Northern Ireland as a way of solving something where we've no system
and
in Ireland.
Anthony, you mentioned that there are some people going over and declaring bankruptcy and then coming back to Ireland before their time is up.
And of course you can do that. Now, you do run a risk, but would a bank challenge your bankruptcy if you've got very little assets? Of course they're going to challenge what they call, the big boys, because they could have moved assets, that type of thing. But for somebody who's got maybe one or two houses, then will a bank spend money when they're clearly insolvent and there's no money there in challenging a bankruptcy? But there is that possibility that they could come back. But
because they are supposed to reside in their main centre of interest for the period
their
of
centre of main
bankruptcy.
interest is supposed to be there.
Yeah, and if they don't, I mean, it's not a valid bankruptcy.
No.
And that's the truth of it.
And of course there's all the problems with their credit rating when they come back to Ireland and trying to start over again. I mean, people probably haven't started over again because this is all just happening.
And there's no credit available. But that's happening to people whether or not they are officially bankrupt, because once you default on your debts, it affects your credit rating. But I do have a theory about that credit rating is going to have to be restructured in Ireland, because so many people's credit rating is impaired that they'll have to think again if they want to lend money ever again.
And just on the credit rating as well, if you go in the US, they've got it now where the people who went bankrupt 2 years ago, they are getting loans to buy houses again. It just shows how far forward they are with regard to, you know, and they're able to start again afresh. And,
well, that's it. Yeah. Well, America aren't. I mean, it's different, whole different ball game over there. But many thanks, Anthony. It's Debt Options is the service. Many thanks to both of you coming on today.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Now, after the break, what makes a great Irish person? We'll be finding out which scoundrels, military men, and pop stars make the cut.